It was an autumn afternoon in Central Park, when the golden leaves danced in the wind like natural confetti celebrating the change of season. James Harrington, aged 45, sat alone on a worn wooden bench, his Italian three-piece suit contrasting with the simplicity of the setting. His fingers absent-mindedly twirled the gold ring with sapphire that had belonged to his grandmother, a nervous habit he had developed over years of solitude. The playground in front of him was filled with children's laughter, a sound that always made him question his life choices. As CEO of Harrington Enterprises, he had built an empire, but his achievements seemed empty when confronted with the genuine joy of those children. His lost gaze captured fragments of memories, solitary dinners in starred restaurants, endless meetings, and the Harrington mansion, too big for one man. "Your ring shines like a star," a childish, melodious voice cut through his thoughts. James lowered his eyes and found a pair of curious green eyes staring at him. The little girl, with red braids and freckles on her nose, didn't show the slightest hesitation at his usually austere countenance. "My name is Lily," she continued, approaching him without ceremony. "May I take a closer look?" Something about the innocence of that moment made James smile, a gesture his employees swore was rarer than a solar eclipse. "Of course," he replied, holding out his hand so that she could take a closer look at the jewel. "It's incredible," exclaimed Lily, her eyes shining with fascination. "My mother has one just like it." The world seemed to freeze for an instant. James felt as if the air had been sucked out of his lungs. The ring was unique, made to order for his grandmother, Eleanor Harrington, in 1955. There was no other like it. "Lily, don't bother him," a female voice sounded from a distance. A young woman, probably in her 30s, was hurrying towards them. "But Mom, look, it's just like your ring," insisted Lily, pointing to James at hand. The woman, who introduced herself as Catherine Mitchell, visibly paled at the sight of the jewel. Her lips trembled slightly, and James noticed that she had unconsciously touched a silver cord around her neck, where the ring was probably hanging. "I apologize for intruding on my daughter," said Catherine, her voice betraying an emotion that went beyond social embarrassment. "Lily has a very vivid imagination." "No problem at all," replied James, standing up. His analytical eye, trained by years of negotiations, picked up on subtle details in Catherine. The natural, elegant posture, the delicate features that reminded him of someone from his past, and above all, her reaction to seeing the ring. As the two women walked away, James remained motionless, his mind working furiously. His grandmother's words, spoken on her deathbed, echoed in his memory. "There are secrets in our family, James, that the ring holds. When the time is right, you will know." On that ordinary fall afternoon, James Harrington was certain that he had just stumbled upon one of those secrets, and for the first time in years, he felt something different from the boredom that dominated his life, a burning curiosity that consumed him from the inside. The wind blew stronger, raising more golden leaves, as if nature itself wanted to mark this moment. James looked at the ring once more, realizing that perhaps his grandmother was right. The time had come. The morning after the meeting in the park, James arrived earlier than usual at his office on the 50th floor of the Harrington building. The rising sun painted Manhattan in golden hues, but his mind was far from that spectacular view. Sitting down in his leather armchair, he opened the bottom drawer of his desk, revealing an old cedar box that he hadn't touched for years. The scent of old wood filled his senses as his hands trembled slightly when he opened the lid. Inside, carefully preserved, were the last tangible memories of his grandmother Eleanor. Yellowed photographs, carefully folded letters, and a diary bound in faded red leather. "Mr. Harrington, your first meeting starts in 20 minutes. His assistant's voice sounded over the intercom. "Cancel everything," he replied without hesitation. "I'm not available to anyone today." Picking up the first photograph, James observed his grandmother Eleanor in her younger years. The image captured a moment in 1955, during a garden party at the Harrington mansion. Eleanor was smiling radiantly, her eyes sparkling with a joy that James had rarely witnessed in person. Next to her, partially cut out of the picture, was a man whose face had been deliberately torn. "What were you hiding, Grandma?" he muttered to himself, turning the photograph over. On the back, a delicate inscription read, "Summer 1955, the beginning of everything." James opened the diary, its pages exuding his grandmother's characteristic scent. a mixture of lavender and old paper. The first entry that caught his eye was dated June 15th, 1955. Today I met someone who changed everything. Richard has eyes that seem to see into my soul. He doesn't care about names or family fortunes. When I'm with him, I'm just Eleanor, not a Harrington. But I know that our happiness has an expiration date. Dad would never allow. The sound of the telephone interrupted her reading. It was Maxwell, her trusted private investigator. Mr. Harrington, I found some information on Catherine Mitchell. The deep voice sounded on the other end of the line. Her maiden name was Catherine Collins. She works as an art restorer at the Metropolitan Museum. She was widowed 2 years ago when her husband died in a car accident. But there's something interesting. Her birth certificate has some inconsistencies. James felt his heart race. What kind of inconsistencies? The original records seem to have been altered. And there's more. I found a connection to a name that might interest you. Richard Collins. The name hit James like a punch in the gut. Richard, the same name as in his grandmother's diary. Keep investigating, James ordered, hanging up the phone. Returning to the diary, he skimmed a few pages until he found an entry that made his blood run cold. September 20th, 1955. Today I gave my heart to Richard along with the ring Mom left me. He swore he would keep it forever, as a symbol of our forbidden love. If this ring ever returns to the Harrington family, it will be the sign that our paths will cross again. James closed the diary tightly, his mind processing the implications. The ring Lily had mentioned. Could it be the same one? How had it gotten back to his grandmother, who had passed it on to him on her deathbed? He stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. His meticulously organized life was about to be shaken by secrets buried decades ago. The reflection in the glass showed a different man from the cold, calculating executive everyone knew. Here was just a grandson trying to understand his grandmother's complex legacy. He picked up the phone again, dialing the number for the Metropolitan Museum. After a few minutes of waiting, a soft voice answered. Restoration Department, Catherine Mitchell speaking. James took a deep breath before answering. Ms. Mitchell, this is James Harrington. I believe we need to talk about a certain ring. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Café Artemis, a discreet establishment on the Upper East Side, seemed frozen in time with its Art Deco furniture and crystal chandeliers. Catherine Mitchell was already seated at a table at the back when James arrived, punctually at 2 in the afternoon. She was nervously playing with the cord around her neck, the same one James had noticed in the park. Mrs. Mitchell, James greeted, taking a seat. Up close, the features that had once seemed vaguely familiar now screamed similarities with the photographs he had spent the morning studying. Thank you for agreeing to meet me. Please call me Catherine, she replied, her fingers still entwined in the cord. I confess I was surprised by your call. I didn't think a Harrington would be interested in talking to me. James watched as she pronounced his surname. There was a mixture of reverence and something more. Resentment, perhaps. I think we have a lot to discuss, he said, pulling out an old photograph from his inside jacket pocket. Do you recognize anyone here? Catherine took the photo with trembling hands. It was the picture of the garden at Harrington Manor, the same one James had found earlier, with the partially torn man next to Eleanor. My God, she whispered, her eyes watering. It's him, my grandfather Richard. The confirmation hit James like a wave. His suspicions were beginning to materialize. Catherine, would it be possible to see the ring you're wearing? After a moment's hesitation, she pulled the cord, revealing a ring identical to the one James was wearing. The blue sapphire sparkled in the coffee light, as if it recognized its match. My grandfather Richard gave me this ring on his deathbed, Catherine explained, her voice breaking. He told me a story about a forbidden love and an impossible choice. He said the ring was proof that not all love can be erased by time or money. James removed his own ring, placing it next to Catherine's. They were perfectly identical, even down to the tiny scratches that time had left. My grandmother Eleanor told me something similar, James revealed, but I never fully understood what she meant. How long have you known about this connection? Since Lily was born, replied Catherine. When I saw her name in the papers, I started researching. The dates, the stories, everything fitted together. But what could we do? The Harringtons are untouchable, James added with a bitter smile. Yes, that's always been the image my family has cultivated. But you know, Catherine, spending a lifetime being untouchable means spending a lifetime being alone. A heavy silence fell over the table, broken only by the distant clink of cups and the murmur of other conversations. "There's something else you need to see," said Catherine, opening her handbag. She took out a yellowed envelope. "These are letters my grandfather kept. Letters from Eleanor. He never opened them after everything happened." James took the envelope reverently. "Why are you showing me these now?" "Because Lily saw something in you in that park, something that goes beyond the Harrington name or the money. She saw someone looking for connection, just like the rest of us." At that moment, a waitress approached to take their orders, but they both barely noticed her. They were trapped in a moment suspended in time, where the sins and secrets of the past were finally beginning to surface. "There's one more thing," said Catherine, hesitantly. "Something I discovered recently about the day my grandfather and your grandmother separated. Something that changed the course of our families forever." James leaned forward, his heart racing. "What happened that day?" "It wasn't their choice," Catherine replied, her words laden with weight. "It was a trap, set by someone very close to both of them, someone who is still alive and who, to this day, holds the biggest secret of all." The sound of a cup breaking somewhere in the cafe seemed to underline the gravity of that revelation. James felt the weight of generations of lies and secrets on his shoulders as he looked at the ring in his hand. No longer just a family jewel, but a key to a mystery that needed to be unraveled. The Harrington mansion stood imposingly against the gray autumn sky, its Victorian windows reflecting the warm afternoon light. James led Catherine through the manicured gardens, now painted in shades of red and gold. The same garden where, decades ago, Eleanor and Richard had experienced their forbidden love. "It's just like in the pictures," Catherine murmured, her eyes roaming over the ivy arches and ancient statues. "My grandfather used to draw this place from memory. Every detail, every angle." James stopped in front of a stone bench partially covered in dried leaves. "It was her favorite place," he said, his voice laden with memories. "Grandma used to spend hours here, especially in the last few years. Now I understand why." As they entered the mansion, the scent of old wood and beeswax enveloped them. James led Catherine to the library on the second floor, a sanctuary of rare books and preserved memories. The dark oak bookcases reached to the ceiling, and a circular wrought iron staircase gave access to the uppermost volumes. "I need to show you something," said James, turning to a seemingly ordinary panel on the wall. With a precise movement, he pressed a specific ornament, revealing a secret compartment. "I found this a few weeks ago, but never had the courage to open it." From inside the hiding place, he pulled out a black velvet box, larger than the one he kept in his office. Catherine approached, her breathing visibly altered. "These are the letters she never sent," James explained, opening the box carefully. "And this." At the bottom of the box, there was a black leather notebook with the initials E.H. engraved in gold. Unlike the diary James already knew, this one seemed more personal, more secret. "To be opened only when the sapphires meet again," read the inscription on the first page. She knew this day would come. As they leafed through the notebook, a loose photograph slid to the floor. Catherine picked it up and her face paled. "It can't be," she whispered. The photo showed Eleanor, Richard, and a third man in an elegant office. On the back there was a date, October 15th, 1955, and an annotation, "The day of betrayal, G.H. G.H." James repeated thoughtfully. "George Harrington, my grandfather. But how? I thought your grandfather didn't know about." "Apparently," James interrupted, "he knew a lot more than we thought." At that moment, a noise in the corridor made them both turn around. At the library door, leaning on an ebony cane, stood an elderly man, his face marked by time but still retaining the Harringtons' characteristic haughtiness. "I imagined this day would come," said George Harrington, his voice hoarse but firm. "When I saw in the papers about Catherine's husband's accident, I knew it was only a matter of time." James felt his blood run cold. "You knew, all this time?" George limped over to a nearby armchair and sat down heavily. "I knew everything. In fact, I was the one who orchestrated their breakup." Catherine stepped forward, her eyes sparking with restrained anger. "How could you? You destroyed the lives of two people who loved each other. To save them both," George replied, his gaze lost in the shadows of the past. "You don't understand. Back then, there was more at stake than just a forbidden romance." James approached his grandfather, holding Eleanor's notebook tightly. "Then make us understand." After all this time, don't you think we deserve the truth? George looked out of the window, where the leaves continued their endless dance. The truth, he muttered, is that Eleanor and Richard weren't the only ones with a secret. There was something much darker going on in the Harrington family, something that could have destroyed not just them, but all of us. The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. Catherine sat down in a nearby chair, her hands shaking slightly. James remained standing, his mind trying to process the implications of those words. "It's time," George continued, turning to face them. "It's time to tell you about the night Eleanor discovered the documents, about the real reason Richard had to leave, and about the price we all paid for keeping this secret." The afternoon shadows lengthened across the library, as 3 generations of fragmented history prepared to face truths long buried under the weight of time and silence. The library of the Harrington mansion seemed to shrink around them as George settled into his armchair, the old leather creaking under his weight. The fire in the fireplace crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the book-lined walls. "In 1955, George began, his voice heavy with grief, Harrington Enterprises was on the brink of ruin. Not the financial ruin that everyone feared, but a moral one. My father, William Harrington, had built part of his fortune through business dealings with, shall we say, questionable partners during the war." James sat on the edge of a nearby table, his face tense. What kind of business? Fake documents, new identities for people who should have answered for war crimes. George paused, running a hand over his wrinkled face. "Eleanor discovered it all by accident. She found the files hidden in the same secret compartment where you just found that notebook." Catherine stood up abruptly. "And Richard, what was his role in all this?" "Richard Collins," George smiled bitterly, "was an undercover federal investigator. He initially approached Eleanor as part of his investigation, but he really fell in love," Catherine added, her voice breaking. "Exactly," confirmed George. "When I discovered his true identity, I realized that we were all at a terrible impasse. If the investigation went ahead, not only would my father be arrested, but dozens of families would be destroyed, some of them innocent people who were just trying to rebuild their lives." James walked over to the window, looking out at the darkening garden. "So you interfered." "I gave Richard a choice," George continued, his eyes fixed on the flames. "He could go ahead with the investigation, expose everything and destroy not only the Harringtons but also Eleanor, who would be considered an accomplice for discovering the documents and not reporting them. Or he could leave," whispered Catherine, finally understanding. "Yes, leave and never come back, taking with him only the ring as a reminder of the love he had to sacrifice." George picked up his cane, squeezing it tightly. Eleanor never knew the real reason. She believed that Richard had simply abandoned her. James turned sharply. "Why are you telling us this now?" "Because I'm dying, James," George replied with surprising calm. "Cancer, 3 months, according to the doctors. And because you two," he looked between James and Catherine, "deserve the chance that Eleanor and Richard never had. The chance to right the wrongs of the past." Catherine removed the ring from the cord around her neck, looking at it in the firelight. "There's something else, isn't there? Something you haven't told us yet." George nodded slowly. "The documents, they still exist. Eleanor hid them somewhere in this mansion before she died. She left clues in the diary you've just found." "Why would she do that?" asked James. "Because your grandmother was smarter than all of us." George smiled sadly. "She knew that one day the truth would have to come out, but she also knew that it had to be at the right time, when the consequences would no longer destroy innocent lives." A heavy silence fell over the library. Outside, the autumn wind shook the trees, making the leaves swirl like dancers in a natural ballet. "There's one more thing," said George, his voice now almost a whisper, "about the accident that killed your husband, Catherine. It wasn't an accident." Catherine paled, her hands gripping the arms of the armchair. "What?" "He was investigating the same case as your grandfather, decades ago. He got too close to the truth. Someone who still has an interest in keeping those secrets buried." George didn't complete the sentence. His gaze was lost in the shadows of the library, carrying the weight of decades of secrets and regrets. James approached Catherine, who was visibly shaking. "We need to find these documents," he said, his voice determined. "Not just for historical truth, but for the justice your husband sought." Catherine nodded slowly, wiping away a tear. "Eleanor left the clues in the diary. She wanted us to find out together. "The first puzzle," said George, standing up with difficulty, "is in the initials engraved on the cover. E.H. doesn't just stand for Eleanor Harrington. It was her code for eternal hope, the place where it all began." As George limped towards the library door, James and Catherine exchanged glances. The search for the truth was just beginning, and with it, the promise of justice and redemption that spanned generations. The basement of the Harrington mansion smelled of time forgotten. James led the way with a flashlight, lighting the way between piles of covered furniture and dusty boxes. Catherine followed close behind, clutching Eleanor's diary to her chest as she consulted the last notes they had deciphered. "Where eternal hope meets the rising sun, look for the moment when love overcame fear," Catherine read for the 10th time. "Your grandmother certainly had a gift for riddles." James stopped in front of an old oak door. "The conservatory," he said, turning the rusty knob. It was her favorite place to watch the sunrise. The conservatory was an impressive Victorian structure, with floor-to-ceiling glass walls now covered in decades of dust. Wild vines had found their way through small gaps, creating an organic pattern that blended with the structure's Art Nouveau ornaments. "It's amazing," whispered Catherine, her eyes scanning the room. "I can almost see them here. Grandma used to say that this was the only place in the mansion where she felt truly free," James commented, moving the lantern methodically. "She called it eternal hope," they completed in unison. Catherine approached an old grand piano, its keys yellowed by time. On top of it, an upturned picture frame caught her eye. As she picked it up, the dust revealed a photograph that made her heart leap. Eleanor and Richard, young and smiling, sitting at that very piano. "James, look at this," she called out, turning the picture frame over. "The moment love overcame fear. It's written right here on the back." James examined the photograph closely. "Wait, look at the piano in the picture, the sheet music on it." Catherine leaned over to get a better look. "Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata." Carefully, James opened the piano lid. On the sheet music stand, yellowed and fragile, was the same score as in the photograph, but as they picked it up, they realized that it wasn't just sheet music. It was a detailed map of the mansion, drawn between the lines of the musical notes. "She was brilliant," James murmured in awe. "She used music as a code. Each note marks a specific location. And look," Catherine pointed to a particular sequence of notes, marked in faded red. "These form a path." Following the musical map, they crossed the conservatory to a section of seemingly solid wall. James ran his fingers over the surface until he found a small hidden mechanism. With a soft click, a panel opened, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. "Are you sure you want to continue?" asked James, noticing Catherine's hesitation. She took the ring off her neck and slipped it on her finger. "My husband died searching for this truth. I can't stop now." The staircase led to a small chamber, no bigger than a closet. On the walls, dozens of photographs and documents were meticulously organized, connected by red threads that formed a complex web of relationships and events. "My God," whispered Catherine, examining the documents. "It wasn't just war criminals. There was a much bigger scheme. Money laundering, trafficking in stolen works of art." James read quickly, his face growing paler with each discovery. "And names of people who are still in power today." A particular envelope caught Catherine's eye. Inside, she found a letter dated a week before her husband's alleged accident. "James," her voice shook. "Michael discovered all this. He was about to expose." A noise on the stairs made them freeze. Heavy footsteps descended slowly, accompanied by the familiar sound of a cane. "Impressive investigative work." A voice that didn't belong to George Harrington echoed in the small chamber. Eleanor was always meticulous in her records. James instinctively placed himself between Catherine and the staircase. In the dim light, the figure of Maxwell, his private investigator, emerged from the shadows, holding a gun. "You know," Maxwell continued, his voice strangely calm, "I've spent decades protecting these secrets, first for your grandfather, then for others interested in keeping the past buried. Your father tried to do the same as you, James. That's why you had that accident on the yacht 15 years ago. James' world seemed to fall apart. You killed my father. Just as I had to deal with your husband, Catherine." Maxwell shrugged. "And now, unfortunately, I'm going to have to deal with both of you." The sound of a gunshot echoed through the conservatory, But it didn't come from Maxwell's gun. The echo of the shot was still reverberating as Maxwell staggered forward, his gun falling with a metallic thud. On the stairs behind him, George Harrington held an old Colt pistol, smoke still escaping from the barrel. "I always knew you were a snake, Maxwell," said George, descending the last few steps with difficulty. "I just didn't think you'd killed my own son." Maxwell pressed his wounded shoulder, blood dripping between his fingers. "You don't understand, George. You never understood what was really at stake." James held Catherine close behind him, his heart hammering in his chest. "How long did you know, Grandpa?" George reached the last step, his breathing heavy with exertion. "I began to suspect after your father died. William Jr. was always determined to find out the truth about the family empire, just like you, James. But you allowed all this to go on," Catherine accused, her voice shaking with anger. "People died. Out of cowardice," George admitted, his eyes full of regret. "The same fear that made me separate Eleanor and Richard. I always chose protecting the family name over doing what was right." Maxwell let out a bitter laugh. "And now you think that one act of belated heroism is going to redeem decades of complicity?" "No," George replied, "but I can at least try to make up for my mistakes before I die." Just then, the sound of sirens began to echo in the distance, coming closer to the mansion. "I've already alerted the authorities," said George. "All the documents, all the evidence Eleanor kept, everything will be handed over." Maxwell tried to move towards the exit, but James was quicker, pinning him against the wall. "This is for my father," he whispered, before landing a punch that knocked the former investigator unconscious. Catherine began to methodically collect the most important documents, her hands shaking slightly. "Michael was so close," she muttered, "so close to exposing all this. And now let's finish what he started," said James, helping her organize the evidence. George watched the scene with a mixture of pride and sadness. Eleanor knew this day would come. That's why she left all these clues, all this path for you to follow together. "Why didn't you tell us about Maxwell before?" asked James, as the sirens grew louder. "Because I needed to be sure," replied George, sitting down heavily on an old trunk. "Sure that he really was the killer, sure that you two would find each other, sure that it was time for the truth to come out." Catherine found another letter hidden among the documents, this one addressed specifically to her. The handwriting was Eleanor's. "Dear Catherine, if you're reading this, it means that the moment I've been waiting for has finally arrived. The ring your grandfather Richard kept wasn't just a symbol of our love, it was a key to all this truth. Forgive us for allowing so many lies to persist for so long, but please know that your grandfather never stopped loving me, just as I never stopped loving him. Sometimes love has to wait generations to find its redemption. With eternal love, Eleanor." Tears streamed down Catherine's face as she read. James put a hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. The sound of approaching footsteps and voices indicated that the police had arrived. George stood up with difficulty. "Are you ready?" he asked, looking at his grandson and Catherine. "After we hand over this evidence, nothing will be the same. The name Harrington, maybe it's time the name Harrington meant something different," James interrupted. "Something other than power and secrets." Catherine held Eleanor's letter close to her heart. "Something like hope," she added, a small smile appearing on her lips. The lights of the police lanterns began to dance across the walls of the conservatory, lighting the way to a new era. The sun was rising over the horizon, its first rays breaking through the dusty glass, a new dawn for long-buried truths. Maxwell was beginning to regain consciousness when the first policeman came down the stairs. George Harrington straightened his shoulders, preparing to finally tell the whole story. James and Catherine stood side by side, their rings gleaming in the growing light, symbols no longer of a lost love, but of a truth finally found. The week that followed the discovery at Harrington Manor was a whirlwind of testimonies, newspaper headlines, and explosive revelations. The main hall of the mansion, once the scene of grandiose social events, had been transformed into a makeshift investigation center, with federal agents cataloging decades of secrets. James watched everything from the window of his office in the Harrington building, the lights of Manhattan twinkling like earthly stars in the twilight. The newspaper on his desk carried the headline, "Harrington Empire Exposes Decades-Long Scheme, Heir Leads Investigation of Past Crimes." "Penny for your thoughts," Lily's voice sounded from the doorway, making James smile. The little girl had become a constant presence in his life since the whole truth came out. "I was just thinking about how one curious little girl changed everything," he replied, turning to find not only Lily but also Catherine standing in the doorway. "Mom says we're going to live in the mansion now," Lily announced, rushing to hug James. "Is it true there's a secret garden there?" Catherine entered the study carrying an old box. "We found some more things in the conservatory," she explained. "I thought you might like to see it." Together, they sat on the leather sofa while Lily curiously explored the room. Catherine opened the box, revealing a set of still-sealed letters and a small photo album. "They're all addressed to Richard," said Catherine, her voice soft. "Eleanor never sent them, but she never destroyed them either." James picked up one of the photographs. It showed a young Eleanor, sitting at the piano in the conservatory, her face radiant with happiness. On the back, a date and a note. The day the music stopped, October 15th, 1955. "The day they were separated," murmured Catherine. "Mr. James," called Lily from the window. "Look, your grandfather's coming." George Harrington entered the office a few minutes later, looking older but somehow lighter. Since the revelations, he had cooperated fully with the investigations, seeking redemption in his last months of life. "I've brought something for you," he said, pulling an envelope from his inside jacket pocket. "Eleanor gave me this many years ago, with specific instructions to hand it over when everything came to light." Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, yellowed by time. Eleanor's elegant handwriting filled the page. "My dears, if you are reading this, it means that you have finally found each other and the truth that I have guarded for so long. James, my beloved grandson, you have your father's strength and, I hope, a little of my stubbornness. Catherine, you carry not only Richard's blood, but also his integrity and courage. What we did in the past, the secrets we kept, the lies we perpetuated, was our misguided way of protecting those we loved. But true love doesn't need protection. It needs truth. The rings you now carry are more than family jewels. They bear witness to the fact that love, even when forced to hide, finds its way through the generations. Take care of each other, protect Lily, and make Harrington Manor no longer a place of secrets, but a home of hope. With eternal love, Eleanor Lily, who had approached silently, took James and Catherine's hand. "Can we make a new garden in the conservatory?" she asked, her eyes shining with innocence. "Of course, darling," replied Catherine, wiping away a tear. "A garden of hope." George watched the scene with watery eyes. Eleanor always said that true love has its own time. Maybe she was right. Sometimes it takes a whole generation to right the wrongs of the past. James stood up and walked over to the window. The sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "We can't change the past," he said, "but we can honor it by building a better future. And that's exactly what we're going to do," added Catherine, joining him with Lily. That night, as the city continued its incessant rhythm outside, 4 generations of a story of love, loss, and redemption finally found their place of belonging. The Harrington Mansion, with its secrets now exposed to the light, was preparing for a new chapter, no longer as a symbol of power and privilege, but as a witness that love, even through the decades, never loses its transforming power. Autumn gave way to winter, and the Harrington Mansion underwent its own metamorphosis. The conservatory, once abandoned to the shadows of the past, now pulsed with new life. Lily had fulfilled her wish to create an indoor garden, and small seedlings of different species were beginning to sprout in carefully arranged pots. It was a December morning when James found Catherine organizing the last of the case documents in her father's old office. The federal investigation had ended, resulting in several arrests of prominent figures and the complete restructuring of Harrington Enterprises. "I found something interesting," said Catherine, lifting a yellowed envelope. "It's a deed. Eleanor has secretly transferred a considerable portion of her shares to a charitable foundation, established in the name of Richard Collins." James moved closer, examining the document. "The Eternal Hope Foundation," he read, a smile forming on his lips. "She never stopped planning for the future, even when all seemed lost. And there's more," Catherine continued, revealing another document. "The foundation's main aim is to help families separated by circumstances beyond their control. Eleanor set it up in 1980, using a false name so as not to arouse suspicion. Just then, Lily burst through the door, her red hair covered in snow. "Grandpa George is asking you to come to the conservatory," she announced, panting. "He says it's important." They found George sitting in his favorite chair in the renovated conservatory, watching the snowflakes falling on the other side of the windows. His face, although scarred by illness, bore a serenity that James had never seen before. "I thought you should see this," he said, holding out a small recording device. "Eleanor left this message the day she handed me that last letter." With trembling hands, James pressed play. His grandmother's voice filled the room. "George, my old friend, if you're listening to this, it means you finally found the courage I always knew you had. The weight of secrets is terrible, isn't it? But there's something liberating about finally letting them go. Richard and I understood a long time ago that our love wasn't meant to flourish in our time. But we planted seeds, George. Seeds that now, through James and Catherine, have finally found fertile soil to grow. The Eternal Hope Foundation isn't just a means of doing good. It's our way of ensuring that other families don't suffer the separations we did. Use it wisely. Help James and Catherine turn it into something even greater. And George, I forgive you. I always have. Sometimes fear makes us make decisions that we regret for the rest of our lives. But it's not too late to do the right thing. The recording ended, leaving an emotionally charged silence in the air. Lily, who had listened to everything with surprising attention for her age, approached George and held his hand. "It's snowing harder," she observed, pointing to the flakes that were now falling in profusion. "It looks like magic." "Yes, it does," agreed George, his voice breaking. "You know, Lily, your great-grandmother Eleanor loved snow days. She said it was like the world was being cleansed, getting ready for a new beginning." James and Catherine exchanged meaningful glances. The mention of the Eternal Hope Foundation had awakened something in them, a greater purpose that transcended simply solving the crimes of the past. "I think I know what we should do," said James, taking the documents from Catherine's hands. "Let's expand the foundation. Use the resources of Harrington Enterprises not only to help separated families, but also to promote social justice." "Eleanor would love that," murmured George, watching Lily, who was now pressing her nose against the glass, enchanted by the snow. "To use the family's power and influence to do good, to create hope," added Catherine, entwining her fingers with James. The conservatory, now warmed by the new life springing up in its corners, seemed to vibrate with possibilities. The shadows of the past, although still present, no longer dominated the atmosphere. In their place, something new was growing, something that Eleanor and Richard had dreamed of decades ago. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Manhattan with its white mantle of renewal. Inside the Harrington mansion, a new story was beginning to be written, no longer in secret but in the light of day, with the strength of love that had crossed generations to finally find its place. Spring arrived in New York with an explosion of color and renewal. The conservatory of the Harrington mansion, now completely restored, shone in the morning sun. It was the day of the official opening of the new headquarters of the Eternal Hope Foundation, and Lily's garden had bloomed magnificently for the occasion. James was adjusting his tie in front of the mirror in Eleanor's old bedroom, now transformed into his personal office. The ring on his finger caught the sunlight, reminding him of the journey that had brought them there. George had left peacefully during the winter, but not before seeing the beginning of the transformation that his confession had triggered. "Ready for the big moment?" Catherine asked, entering the room. She was wearing a sapphire blue dress, the same color as the rings that now symbolized not only Eleanor and Richard's love, but also the union of their families. "Almost," replied James, turning to her. "Lily is overseeing every detail of the garden." Catherine laughed. "She insists that the white roses need to be perfectly aligned with the violets that Eleanor loved so much." The sound of voices and soft music began to fill the first floor of the mansion. The inauguration ceremony would bring together not only New York's high society, but also the families who had already benefited from the foundation's initial work. "I found this morning," said Catherine, handing James a yellowed envelope. It was hidden inside the piano, along with the last score Eleanor played. James opened the envelope carefully, immediately recognizing his grandmother's handwriting. "For the day the music plays again, my dear James and Catherine. If you are reading this letter, it means that the conservatory has once again been filled with life and music. It means that the gardens have blossomed again and that the corridors of this house echo with laughter instead of secrets. Richard and I dream of this day, We dreamt of a time when the name Harrington would mean more than power and privilege. It would mean hope. You have turned that dream into reality. The Eternal Hope Foundation was born out of our pain, but it will grow through your love. Use it to heal other families, to reunite separated hearts, to build bridges where once there were walls. Lily, our little gardener, is living proof that love finds its own ways through time. She has Richard's eyes, always curious, always looking for beauty in the most unlikely places. James, my beloved grandson, you have proved stronger than all the shadows our family has carried. And Catherine, you brought back the music that I thought had been silenced forever. The conservatory was always my refuge, the place where I kept not only secrets but also hopes. Now it belongs to you, a symbol that love, when true, transcends generations. With eternal love, Eleanor. Silent tears streamed down Catherine's face as James finished reading. Downstairs, they could hear Lily playing the first notes of Moonlight Sonata on the restored piano, the same music Eleanor and Richard had shared so many years ago. Mom, Dad? Lily's voice echoed down the corridor. It's time. James and Catherine looked at each other, smiling when they heard Lily call them that for the first time. They walked together down the stairs of the mansion, where dozens of people were waiting in the great hall. The conservatory looked magnificent. Flowers of every color filled the space, and the sunlight created dancing patterns through the restored stained glass windows. In the center, a bronze plaque gleamed, Eternal Hope Foundation, in memory of Eleanor Harrington and Richard Collins. True love is never lost. It only waits for the right moment to blossom. James stepped up to the small pulpit, Catherine and Lily at his side. Looking out at the gathered crowd, he saw hopeful faces, families reunited, hearts healed, new beginnings. Welcome to the new era of the Harrington family, he began. An era built not on secrets, but on truth. Not on power, but on love. My grandmother Eleanor used to say that hope is like a seed. It just needs fertile soil and time to flourish. Catherine took his hand, their rings glittering side by side. Lily, between them, smiled radiantly. Today, James continued, we plant not only flowers in this garden, but also hope in the hearts of all those who need to believe that love always finds its way. The spring sun bathed the conservatory in golden light as the soft notes of Moonlight Sonata floated through the air. Eleanor and Richard, although absent, seemed to be smiling through the flowers that Lily had so lovingly planted. The Harrington mansion, once a monument to power and secrets, had become a beacon of hope. And in the conservatory gardens, among the white roses and violets that Eleanor loved so much, two souls separated by time finally found their peace through the love they had planted so many years ago. If you found a family object that revealed that your family's entire history was built on secrets and lies, would you choose to expose the truth, even knowing that it could destroy the legacy and reputation of people you love? Or would you keep silent to protect those who are still alive? Leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.